it's a pleasure to welcome you all here this morning, and we thank you all for turning out for us. Today is the continuation of the Conversations series, and you probably noticed that there's a slight theme to all this. In the 3 months, the first 3 months that we have this is going to be September, October, and November. So we had Chief Flying Eagle last month, as you may recall, and always a delight, Earl Mills. And now this month, we're going to be talking about the first Thanksgiving, which is, you probably got that theme as you walked around this morning, I suppose. And next month, a month from now on November 12th, we'll be talking about the cranberry harvest. So that will be, and I suspect we'll be back in the sports lounge at that point. You're probably getting the idea I favor history, so I do. And that's how I ended up getting with, well, I should say a couple more things first. We want to thank Mashpee TV, which is right over here. Justin's up there. And, very nice, and of course, Chris Ball and Justin take care of all this for us. We also have visitors from the Mayflower Society right here, from the Mass General Society of Mayflower Descendants. So all you who are looking to get on the chain, you know you have a relative back there somewhere, you can start mobbing right down here right now, and we'll take care of you. We also have a wayfaring artist down here as well. You probably recognize Forrest Pravano, who's up here on a busman's holiday up from Mashpee Common. But today is all about the Thanksgiving activities. That's what we really wanted to focus on. And you're looking at a painting that has been advertised to show that it's a nationally acclaimed piece by a nationally recognized artist. And some of you have said, Karen Rinaldo? And you won't be saying that again after today. We're going to be talking about how Karen got to be who she is, why she was selected to do this commission, and how it all came about. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Karen Rinaldo.
And thank you to Southport for this wonderful turnout on a beautiful day. And Forrest said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "Only because you're here, Forrest."
Terrific. So here's what really launched the whole thing for bringing the painting to Falmouth is, what's his name?
Mark Schmidt.
Mark Schmidt. If you don't know Mark, you'll get to meet him because he's going to be up at the Mayflower Society. He's going to be the new executive director up there. For 10 years, he's been the director of the Falmouth Historical Society, and he's done a masterful job. So there he is. He's known Karen forever. We all know Karen is a local artist and such. And he looked at this and he said, wait a second, that's Karen's painting. That's Washington crossing the Delaware. That's ever-famous pictures of the Civil War and of the prairie being settled. Here's Grant Wood's Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And there's Karen Rinaldo. How does that happen? Well, now you know much of the story. How does it happen? How did she get that commission? And the answer is because she's a visual historian. They use that to train. So how is she nationally known? She's known because this is Scholastic books, grades 4 through 8. You can see up there in the corner. That's how they teach history all over the country. And when we advertised the book in the print in Yankee magazine, Karen started getting calls from all over the country saying, hey, I've seen that. You know, I know your painting. And that was how they did that. So this is where it started, right here. And this was its first display in Falmouth. Karen?
So this was a temporary housing Mark Schmidt, the executive director, has a great vision, and with the 400th commemoration of the Mayflower, he feels that this would be a wonderful thing to bring to town and connect the towns from Plymouth to the Cape, and really have it something exciting for tourists. Then COVID hit and it kind of disrupted the plans, but he did get permission for a 2-year loan from the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, the NACCC. He set up a temporary housing, and you'll notice to the left there's a black and white drawing. That was the original piece on tracing paper that the historians would have signed off on before going to the painting stage. So it was in a temporary housing in the Conant House on the campus of the MOG.
And if you look and you see that this is very dark, and you say, what's going on there? It's because it was the tracing. It was the basis for what you see on the right-hand side. And this is that old thing that we all used to do as kids in school, where you put the pencil sideways and you use the graphite, on one side, then you make a copy of it onto the canvas. And I should mention before I forget otherwise, a lot of people have been very interested in what was just a streak of good luck. That there's actually a 14-minute video of how Karen painted this piece. Forrest thinks it was done by the numbers, but it's really not.
So because I wasn't able to be a part of the NACCC's anniversary here, I thought, what would I do to take my place? And so as I would create the painting, not an easy task, but I would step back, take a photograph, move on to another section of the painting, photograph it, and it chronologued, it actually documented every stroke in the painting. So it is a 14-minute video, and it brings the piece to life, but it brings you inside my head, and it really shows what you go through in the process of this. Also, the enormous responsibility that I felt. We'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, Karen gives a tour of this down at the Historical Society on Saturday mornings from 10 to noon. It won't be tomorrow, but all the weekends right through the rest of the year, Karen will be down there from 10 to noon on a Saturday morning, talking about that. And a lot of folks like to stay on and watch that video. They say, except for the fact that Karen couldn't give a report to the folks in Wisconsin, that we wouldn't have that record.
Yeah, it turned out to be quite valuable and quite interesting, and now people are requesting a copy of that as well. So, but it's a great teaching aid, so it's a nice component. This back side of the Wicks house is where the painting is presently housed and on exhibit. And they brought in a local builder to create an environmentally safe and accessible room for handicap and just a climate-controlled space for the painting. And here's the interior of the room. Again, to the right, you see the framed drawing and the painting. And the perimeter of the room carries really the life of the painting, because from the moment it was released from my hands, it took on a life of its own. I would hear that expression, and I never really understood it, but that's what happened.
There it is. And that's what caused this exhibit space to be developed, and it's all right there. Now that canvas is 5 feet wide and 3 feet high. And when you see it in person, the colors will jump right out at you. It's worth the trip down to Falmouth and stop at Gelfie's for an ice cream.
You know, another thing I'll mention is when you see an original piece of work, whether you go to the great museums in Europe, sometimes you're disappointed. You'll say, oh, I didn't realize it was that small, or something about it it becomes disappointing. And this piece, I think, makes you step back and re-examine your own thoughts and gives you a whole different perspective on a very important time.
This is how it was unveiled. That's Pilgrim Hall in Plymouth, if you've ever been up there.
So this was 1995.
And there it is. And I said to Karen, Karen said, oh, it's the only picture I have. I don't even know what happened to it. I said, well, for one thing, I really like the drama that attends to it. You know, it's almost better than if you just had a full face on. It was snowing that night, and it was kind of windswept and so forth, and so that's what clouded it. And I said, I don't know what happened to it, but I think you should have kept it as a bedspread.
So the Smithsonian National Museum had a special article in this 2007 magazine, and it went through some of the aspects of the first Thanksgiving, but to the point that this was considered the most historically accurate to date. And this was the narrative inside. Plymouth Plantation exhibit on the Thanksgiving featured this painting, First Thanksgiving, commissioned in 1994 to give an accurate picture of the native presence. Previous well-known paintings, and these were included in a special exhibit at Pilgrim Hall. They had some Wyeth and Norman Rockwell and Ginny Brinscomb's painting that is on permanent display at Pilgrim Hall. Others included only a handful of Indians. Rinaldo portrayed the historically accurate proportion of 90 Wampanoag guests and 52 English colonists. And that was as cited in the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian.
The national reputation is starting to become more clear now.
This actually is a book that the 400th committee had, I don't know, commissioned, but created, and it was with Linda Coombs, who is a Wampanoag from Aquina, from the Vineyard, and a gentleman from England, and they collaborated on the Massachusetts Chronicles, which incorporates 400 years of history. And the idea behind it then was that each school would get a copy of the book. And in the book, in the next slide, you'll see that they included the first Thanksgiving painting. And it was...
Before I go to that painting, I was just going to point out this is Earl Mill's daughter right there, who many of you met last month.
And this is done in a very interesting narrative, as if someone was on the scene at the time of the first Thanksgiving. And so they're reporting what they're seeing and what's going on.
And so there it is, and where it says the inspiration for the book, Karen told me for a year, she was saying, after I became more familiar with the painting itself, for a year she kept saying, there's a book here, there's a book here, there's something waiting to be told about this story. And finally I caught on, and I said, yeah, there is. Well, that's the book. But here's the Shallop in the background, again, sort of a sense of place. Here's Plymouth Rock right over here. As we all know, Plymouth Rock is enshrined in a... Have you ever gone to Plymouth Rock and watched the folks from Ohio when they come and they look down? And they all come back laughing. You know, they all come back with a smile on their face. I think it's great. And so now you know the history, you know the whole thing, and you know why she was drawn by the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches to do this. And the commission was to be a gift to the nation. And that's one of the reasons why you see it now, why it was unveiled at Pilgrim Hall, why it hung for 20 years at Plymouth Plantation. And then Mark Schmidt turned and said, why when we have the artists living in Falmouth, why don't we have that painting on display here? And so that's how it ended up in Falmouth. And now because of the collegiality between the Falmouth museums on the green and Dr. Donna
Curtin.
Curtin,
Yeah.
Fill in the blanks. Usually I play this game with Pat, you know. We finish each other's sentences, so like Mad Libs around my house. You know.
So fortunately, the painting will not be going back out to Wisconsin. When it leaves the Falmouth Historical Society, it will be crated and shipped back over to Plymouth, and it'll be a 28-year reunion from when it was first unveiled there. So they'll have a special exhibit going on, and that'll be quite special.
And right now you start to see the beginning of the history, the visual history of Plymouth Plantation. Oh, that's the book that we ended up writing together. The book itself, to divert just a second, goes back then, and it covers the period of the Nauset tribe being there before we were, obviously. We pick it up in 1602 when Gosnold discovered, if you will, Cape Cod and this whole area, up to 1619 before the Pilgrims arrived. Their arrival, their departure from England to Holland, and then up to the period of King Philip's War. And then because we have all the 15 montages that Karen had done for the 15 Cape Cod towns, it really comes right up to date. This is getting more into the book right now, Karen. I'm going to kind of zip through what the book is then, because it's all part of the story. And we talk about pilgrims, and there are historians who will say, well, we call them pilgrims, but they didn't call themselves pilgrims. But you know, you got to look back and you say, here's the prologue to the Canterbury Tales that Chaucer wrote in 1387. That's a full 200 years before the Pilgrims moved. And one that apro with the shooter so to the truck to march hath pierced to the road. Then longing folk took on pilgrimages. It's right there. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. And where did they go? Especially from every year's end of England to Canterbury they went. And I have to say it in Old English like that because my mother paid for that course. Of course they went on pilgrimages, and they went down to Canterbury. And one of the issues was that they would buy their indulgences. They'd go down and see the Archbishop of Canterbury and give them their wealth, and they'd say, okay, that's a good ticket to heaven. So along the line, Karen sketched this harbor scene of Amsterdam, and one of the things that people don't realize about the Pilgrims, they look at those houses and they say, oh yeah, okay, 1600, of course, I guess that's what they would have lived in. But no, at this point, Westminster Abbey is 400 years old. You know, they sailed from Amsterdam, they went into Amsterdam, and you see lots of boats that looks just like the Mayflower type of thing. You see boats that look like the Charlotte. And you see brick buildings and church steeples. I mean, this was a civilized society. The Pilgrims gave up an awful lot when they came to this country. We take it back to the Holy Roman Empire now. I know you're not here for this. But real quickly, what happened was when the fall of the Roman Empire, then everything fell to the Pope, and he became the head of religion as well as politics. And that went on for about 800 years, but part of the issue was exactly what I just said, the buying of indulgences, and there was enough going on, so that in 1517, Martin Luther said, okay, enough of this already, and so he starts the Protestant Reformation, the protesting the buying of indulgences and that sort of thing. Along about the same time, 1539, King Henry VIII has been married to Catherine of Aragon for 20 years, but he has no heir, and he wants an heir. So he goes to the Pope and he says, hey, I need an heir. I need a new wife. And the Pope said no. And he said, okay, then the heck with it. I'll go start my own religion too. And so he went back to England and created the Church of England and made himself in charge so that he went on to either marry or behead, depending on how things went that day. But there were lots of Puritans, and the Puritans were people who believed that if it isn't in the good book, then it doesn't belong in the liturgy. That's what it was really all about. The Pilgrims were Puritans, and a lot of people call them separatists, as if that's a bad thing. Well, the Puritans were of two flavors. Some said, well, we'll stay inside the church and we'll work within the church. And others separated and said, no, we've really got to step outside. And they became separatists. And they were going to practice their religion other ways. And you end up with, as we all know, Methodists and Lutherans and any number of Protestant religions, Protestant religions. And again, just to show that William Bradford knew that they were pilgrims as well, he writes in 1630, so they left the goodly and pleasant city, which was Leiden, which had been their resting place for 12 years, but they knew they were pilgrims, and they looked not so much on those things, but lifted their eyes to heaven. And it was very much a religious type of a spirit that drove the pilgrims to practice their new religion here. One of Karen's depictions in the book is leaving England and from Holland, sailing across the Atlantic, 66 days at sea. Just before they hit the Cape, they're blown off course. They go and they end up hitting the arm of the Cape. How did they know they were at the arm of the Cape? Because Gosnold had been here for 20 years sooner.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a moment. This is a hopeful image, but to me, it's the most desperate image. And it's a desperate image on a lot of levels, but in going back, they've left their lives behind. Do they know what they're in for? I'd like to think they do, but you know, even the best of intentions, as you know, change very quickly. And so they're given a note, a letter by their spiritual advisor, Reverend Robinson, as they're leaving. And I believe that that becomes the inspiration going forward now to the next slide or two of what becomes the background of the wordage for the Mayflower Compact. He was a very important part of their lives. They left their families behind. They left their homes behind, their friendships, everything. And so that image to me becomes a very desperate image.
And before they got off the boat, then Reverend, not Robinson, Brad, who's the guy?
Well, let me bring up one other point now
go
about
ahead.
the Mayflower Compact. So, first of all, it wasn't called the Compact back then. After the writing of it, it wasn't called the Compact for 150 years, from what I was reading. But the Mayflower Compact is brilliant and a most important document, again, on a lot of levels. But it had to have some spiritual acceptance. And the first few words, the first 6 words are, "In the name of God, amen," which makes it more of a covenant, Your Honor. I would say, instead of being a compact, it is a covenant.
Very much so, and that's how the congregations, of course, work together. And the language is, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, which is where they were aiming. They were aiming actually for the mouth of the Hudson River. As we know, that was the area that became New Amsterdam before the war in 1664, when the English defeated the Dutch there to make it New York instead of New Amsterdam. But this is where they were going, and they were going to combine themselves together in a civil body politic. This is like unheard of, a civil body politic. No king, nobody to tell what to do, but for our better ordering and preservation, we enact such just and equal laws as shall be for the general good of the colony, unto which we all promise all due submission and obedience. That's unheard of. You know, it had never been done before. Europe was very much a feudal society. It was very much dependent upon the king. It was all top-down stuff. And now they have come up with a sense, as Karen has just said, you know, it has these almost religious overtones to it that says, hey, you know, God is among us. Of these, the greatest is to love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's sort of what's behind the congregational concept.
Well, it brings together community and rights and government. Those 3 things together make it a very precious document.
So is it a forerunner of the Constitution? That's debated oftentimes. It's a debate you'll hear today. We look at it and say, well, there was democratic governance. It's all up to us. We are all independent. There's nobody to tell us what to do. We have to be self-sufficient. We're not going to be a monarchy, but by the same token, we can't have anarchy either. There was 103 folks on the Mayflower, and you had half of them were pilgrims, and half of them, and others were, they were called the strangers even, in fact. I mean, they were pickup people because there was enough room on the Mayflower. When people began to realize, as Karen said, it's an act of almost desperation to leave England, and a fair number of people said, I don't think I want to do this. And so that created some room on the vessel. So it was filled with people besides the pilgrims, but they had to somehow come together because they couldn't just all run amok. And we think that's pretty much the basis of the American spirit. You see the monument, the Mayflower Compact is obviously, as Karen said, a cherished document. You see it there on the relief underneath the Pilgrim Monument in Provincetown. You see the signing of it. We do, our research has really used what's called Mort's Relation. It was written by Edward Winslow and Governor Bradford both. It would take turns keeping a diary of what's gone on. And that became really the basis of how we interpret the text in what you're seeing in the painting.
I think it's the fact that, you know, their lives now, they're spent in total survival mode. It's the immediacy of how these entries are being made. They don't have a lot of time to be spending time writing when they're trying to survive the everyday elements. They've landed in Provincetown, and they're in a pretty rough shape. They are starving. They're still living with the thought of what they've left behind, and what are they about to encounter.
And so this is looking at, we're going to kind of go very quickly through the drill and bring them over to Plymouth. But in the meantime, they landed right there. And they started to try to round down around Monomoy so they could end up having been blown off course. They tried to correct, but they took Safe Harbor up there in Provincetown. And then that's when they debarked. As Karen said, you know, after 2 months at sea, they hadn't had fresh water, they hadn't had fresh food, they hadn't had anything. They were pretty desperate shape. So we're going to, the book takes you from, as they discover water up here in Pilgrim Lake, and we just discovered Pilgrim Lake thanks to
Pilgrim Springs.
Pilgrim Spring, and Cornhill. And we'll spend a little time talking about that because there's some debate about that before they finally make it around to Plymouth.
And you know, that whole diversion where they were headed for the Hudson there changed history, really. That changed everything.
Yeah.
That was a defining moment.
So there's some more language, and it's by the first civil body politic. It was taking hold. There's the Pilgrim Spring. If you go out there, you'll see the monument. It's really kind of fun to drive out towards Provincetown. If you haven't done it, it's a great trip. And then Pilgrim Pond, with 16 pilgrims camped there. And if you get it's a monument. You'll have to go with Edith if you want to see it. I think it's the only way you'll find it. She'll take you. But if you look at it today, this is what it looks like, and you can't help but thinking that's exactly what the pilgrims were probably looking at. The scrub.
The terrain hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
Oh. This is a great shot, a long distance shot. In the furthest point, you would see Cornhill, that area. So it's approaching that Cornhill area. There's a plaque at the bottom of the hill right over to the left there that announces the ascent of the pilgrims. And to make a comment just before this, going back to, you're fine with that slide, but going back to the moment when they have their first drink of fresh water, goes to their state of mind now when they reach Cornhill. And to the next slide, we digged up we digged up a great kettle full of fair corn. If we could find any of the people, we would give them the kettle again and satisfy them for their corn. This is out of Mort's relation, which place we call Corn Hill. And they're always giving praise to God. And sure, it was God's good providence that we found this corn, for else we not know how should we have done. So soon as we meet conveniently with them, we will give them full satisfaction. Very important statement, I think.
It is, and oftentimes overlooked. You will hear, and again, it's your call, this is a debatable point among historians, and you often hear about how the Pilgrims went and they ravaged through the Wampanoag burial grounds and the storage and so forth. They stole their corn. That's the most common thing. Even Nathaniel Philbrick says it. Which, anyway.
Well, and I had a conversation with Nathaniel Philbrick about, I asked if he thought that the Pilgrims were a complicated people. And he said he thought that they were, for reasons such as this. And I would say that they were very human. We're looking at a time 400 years ago, and a lot of people will say this never happened. It's like these people didn't exist. They're imaginary. When they look at the painting, they'll say, oh, this was from your imagination. No. It's not of imagination. It's of truth, and it's of sensitivity. And the word sensitivity is what the natives, it's what the Wampanoags have praised. They've appreciated that, and that's why they've used the image in their presentations. So I think this goes to a state of mind, the continued desperateness that they're feeling, and a very human, perhaps, reaction now that they've taken something. Yes, it isn't theirs, but they do say, when we find who this belongs to, we will offer
Recompense,
return of the item.
And they say it twice, and they actually do it as well. And there's the monument there. And again, you'll have to go with Edith and Warren if you want to find the
there's a very buried little monument.
It's buried up there, but you go up in there and cut the grass. Is that correct? Is that how you? So then you come down to the first encounter. Now, we called our book The First Encounter, but we interpret the encounter to be more than just the exercise on December 8th. And really, the first encounter is the first 50 years, as we look at it, right through King Philip's War. But this is the activity that they call the first encounter. This is where it happened. On December 8th, you want to say something?
No, well, I was just going to say that this shot was actually the inspiration for a lot of work that was done for Eastham. And Edith is on the 400, she was on the 400th committee up there in Eastham. So this became the impetus for a logo that was created and a montage painting for them as well. And you'll see that in a couple minutes.
Yeah, now the first encounter took place right up here, right on the crest of the hill. We like to think that, and the depiction will show smoke rising from back here, because this was very much an Indian native area. So the Pilgrims had been coming along. It's now December 8th. December 7th, they were only up by about a mile north of this on the arm of the Cape. So it's right here. The Pilgrims had set up their encampment, and it's the next morning. And the native method of warfare was to attack at first light. The American Army actually learned a lot of lessons. There's a book called The Skulking Way of War. And it's really what led to our success in the Revolution. When you think about the British marching down the middle of the street, and you think about the colonists who are behind stone walls and trees and so forth, we learned that. We learned that right away. So there was probably 15 to 30 braves. We don't know how many were really over there. We know that there were 17 people on this expedition from the Mayflower. And it was a 15-minute skirmish. It was over almost as fast as it began on the crest of the hill. Now, We look at that and say, you know, the Indian attack, and they're okay if you say Indian, by the way, I checked that with them. The Indian attack, these guys would kill rabbits with a bow and arrow. They were good. You know, that was their weaponry. We had blunderbusses. All you had to do was shoot the thing and somebody's going to get hurt. But after this skirmish, nobody was injured, nobody was killed. And we think that this is we interpret that as sort of, again, Providence is in favor of what's going to happen here in the settling of America. And there's the plaques. There's also a plaque from the Wampanoag side, and it talks about the first encounter right up in here. Anyway, and then in the relation we talk about after we had given God, we took our shawl up and went on a journey and called this place the first encounter. Again, a very moderate word. There was no animosity here. There was no trigger about, you know, these guys, we took care of them, because they didn't. It was a draw at best.
I think the words are very important. They're not to be overlooked, and I think they do go to really identifying this particular moment that was just a critical point. It's an apex moment, really.
And we call it sort of the inevitable encounter. To us, it's a new world. It's home ownership, cultivate the land, advance Christianity, laws, ordinance. Englishmen, we'll call it New England. At the same time, it's an ancient land. It's a tribal territory. It's their hunting grounds. There's a great spirit, summer camp, winter camp, sachem, corn, squash, pole beans. We call it Nauset. You know, we're already here. We got a name for this. So the clash of cultures was inevitable. How the clash would be resolved would determine the success of this attempt of the English to colonize the land called America. And again, you got to kind of think about this, because we weren't the first ones here. Think about that. Jamestown, everybody knows Jamestown, 1607. Say, well, what about them? They were hated by the tribe. The Powhatans could hardly wait to drive them off the land. In fact, they did drive them off the land. They were all set to quit the colony when Lord Delaware showed up with reinforcements, and he stopped the boat in the mouth of the James River and said, hey, you guys got to go back. You know, we've got to keep this colony going. So they did that. And there was also the Lost Colony up in North Carolina, 1594. They went up, and that was the Croatans. The only thing left was the word Croatan. They had been driven off. If you go back to St. Augustine and you say, well, what about them? They were conquistadors. Don't ever forget that either. They came in to conquer the country. They weren't there in any way participating as the Pilgrims were with the natives that they found. This is a shallop. This is really kind of interesting. It's a fun boat. It sails like a potato. You know, not much you can do with it.
It was an interesting boat because it was in two pieces. So I call it a first prefab construction. And it served as protection on the boat because it was such cramped quarters and the Pilgrims would hover in there. So it was quite an ingenious little creation, actually. This was the commissioned logo for Eastham. And very often I'll incorporate a subliminal message to convey a situation. In this case, they didn't want people to be a part of this first encounter experience, the logo. And so how would you represent people? And so for my suggestion of the smoke coming up out of the dune, that was representing an encampment, a civilization, something taking place. And so the shallop was their signature piece to this whole event, and that became their image. It appeared on banners. It was the center focus of the Eastham painting, and it was a little bit different from the bicentennial painting, but it did incorporate a lot of similar landmarks too for this piece.
And there you have the treaty. This was signed by Chief Master Sawyer and Governor Bradford on March 22nd. Okay, now that's like 4 months after they first landed. You figure they were there at the very end of December. Uh, they only made Plymouth, 1620 by about 15 days. If they were 2 weeks later, we wouldn't be 1620. So they've been there for about 4 months. When finally Massasoit arrives, once again, they let the Pilgrims in. We set up on top of Patuxet. People talk about grave robbing or stealing the corn. We totally occupied a former village. They had just been through a pandemic. And Karen likes to point out, the irony of that all. For 400th anniversary, we're going through a pandemic experience with them.
Well, to make a comment about that, and I say the Pilgrims were always giving thanks. So this pandemic goes through from Maine almost to Narragansett, decimates the native population. The Pilgrims arrive in Plymouth, and they find the land is all cleared. There's no one around, and they're giving thanks. They think this is God's divine intervention, and that He's cleared the land for them. A culture has just been annihilated from this area that was their land, that was their cultivated land. Go ahead.
And so this is the treaty that they signed, and it's too much to read, but Earl Mills likes to say, "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours," is how he sums up the treaty. And it's, if any of my guys injure you, let me know and I'll take care of them. If you injure us, I'll let you know and you take care of them.
I'm going to interrupt you again, but it goes again to the native state of mind. Now, how do you readjust your thinking to say, I'm going to trust these people who, it's other groups before them, other expeditions before them, certainly, but how do I have trust that I'm actually able to come up with a peace treaty? That, to me, says volumes about the natives. Of course, they realized, both sides realized that they needed each other, and I think that became the basis for the treaty.
And actually, I'll say one more thing. Where it lasted for 50 years, that's because Massasoit lived to be another 40 years. It lived another 40 years. Bradford lived another 40 years. All the elders involved, Alden and Winslow and so forth, all died within 5 years of each other, about 40 years later. So King Philip, of course, was the son of Massasoit, and his protagonist was Edward Winslow Jr. And so within one generation, really, there had been so many other Englishmen who came. We kind of defend the Pilgrims and say, it wasn't us, it was the Mashpee colony, right, Edith? It was the other guys. And in many ways it was, because after the Pilgrims came and they had such a pleasant experience with the natives, there was great interest in England to pursue. And so Boston was founded, of course, in 1630, and many follow-on Englishmen came in, along with the French and the Spanish.
One of the things, Kevin, the natives noticed that the Pilgrims were bringing women and children with them. So if there was any concern about would the natives be in jeopardy of being harmed, I think because they saw women and children, they knew that, well, they were more curious about these people than they were afraid of these people. That's an important point.
Okay. We'll clip along here so you can ask some questions or make some comments of your own, folks. But this was what the painting was all about. The harvest has gotten in. Our governor sent 4 men on fowling, get some birds, so that we might, after a special manner, rejoice. Many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the greatest was King Massasoit, and some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. Now, we think that's the first Thanksgiving. There will be those who say it wasn't Thanksgiving until, Roosevelt, who said it was the first. No, we think this is as close as you can call to that. It was a harvest feast, and there it is. And in it, you start to see the beginning of what the country was becoming. You see the animals being fenced in. You see the first street in America. By the way, the Plymouth Plantation itself is not a Disney complex. That was excavated in 1947 by Harry Hornblower. And Hornblower was one of the famous Bostonian financiers, had all the money in the world, and he had an interest in archaeology. He used to play in Plymouth as a kid. He'd leave Beacon Hill and come on down to Plymouth for the summer. And he excavated the village. And I like to say he excavated the village and then Karen populated it. It's the only painting you're going to see where you have 90 braves. This is day one, where you see the braves are kind of clustered together, and you see the leaders though gathered.
In creating this part of the painting was very delicate and very important, and I worked with one of the Wampanoag people at Plymouth Plantation, Nanny Pashaman. He passed away right after this painting was completed, but it was his guidance that helped me to understand the temperament of the natives, their apprehension, the way they would be positioned, of course the clothing they would have been wearing, but it really went to the disposition of how they would be standing, that very kind of on guard almost, and they were there to protect Massasoit. The blink of an eye, we say that they were outpopulated 2-1, so they could have just said, okay, we're done with you. But this is the coming together. We're showing the coming together of two cultures. They weren't there to celebrate. They were there to protect. But it is an occasion where the pilgrims are giving thanks for having survived a very tough winter. For all intents and purposes, they shouldn't even be there. But miraculously they are. The natives too are thankful, and by the way, they have Thanksgiving every day.
Yeah.
They're giving thanks for everything they do.
And every full moon.
Yeah, I mean, they are in tune with the earth. They have a religion which just praises what the Great Spirit has given to them.
This is fascinating, and some of you may have had a chance to turn around some of the documents and so forth, and you can see every character has been researched. What would they look like? There's only one pilgrim who ever had an image actually recorded, and that was Edward Winslow when he went back to England, having been there. Everything else has to be derived from wordage that you find in contemporaneous documents.
Words that you would find like a fair-haired person, a fair complexion, the age, the body type, was the information that I gathered and applied then to create each figure. The responsibility of that became such that I really felt I got to know the pilgrims, and I also felt that empathy and sympathy for the natives. So this was really, in my hands, I was creating two cultures in a time and our history to be portrayed. So I did not take that lightly by any means. And in this close-up, you see Peregrine White. Oceanus was one of the children who was born on the voyage, thus her name. Peregrine is in the cradle, and the cradle is part of the museum archives at Pilgrim Hall.
And this is Resolved White. That's Peregrine's older brother, Resolved. And I have to point him out because Pat's a descendant of Resolved White. Aren't you, Pat? As the kids like to remind me, everybody's a Mayflower descendant but me.
And here we show a portion of the head table with Bradford seated and Brewster standing. And Brewster was another spiritual advisor, someone very important to Bradford. And of course we have Miles Standish there. Seated next to him is John Alden. Purposely put those two together. There was a little romance perhaps going on with Priscilla Mullins, who then becomes Priscilla Alden, and that expression, speak for yourself, John. But there's some background information that goes into each person at the table. They all had remarkable lives. Sam Fuller on the other side of the table takes on a crash course in medicine so that he can take care of the pilgrims. I found that amazing.
One of the things you'll see too is Massasoit is looking away. One figure has been cropped, and that was Squanto to the left. We all know the story about Squanto, and where did these English speakers come from? They were kidnapped 6 years earlier. That's how they learned how to speak English, 1614. And that's why there was some inherent animosity already built into the native population. But they came back and they spoke English. But here's Hobbamoke on the other side, and you'll see Massasoit looking at Hobbamoke because he trusted him more than Squanto.
You know, it's interesting too. There are 13 figures at this table. There's only one other painting in history that shows 13 figures at the table.
That's true.
And so here we show, In the Wake of the Mayflower was inspired by the first Thanksgiving painting. I'm glad you finally listened to me, Kevin.
And there you have it, folks.
Yeah. We're very proud of the book. We're very proud of the painting. And if I may end with a comment about the painting and what I hope that people take away from the image. You know, in 400 years, things haven't changed that much. We're still fighting for our freedoms. We're still trying to keep our families safe and happy. And it's the coming together always of, we don't have as many differences. There are more similarities than differences. When we recognize that, I think we will have peace. So that is my message that I hope the painting carries to you.
Okay, we had a question?
Were they aware that they were going to face Indians when they arrived?
Yeah,
They figured there
I
would
say
probably be
so.
some resistance, and that's why you had, what's his name?
I would say that they
Yeah.
knew what the territory held in store, the degree of what they would encounter. You know, when you plan a trip, you plan it to the best degree that you know what's taking place on your route, but there are surprises along the way. So those are the things that become encounters and things, the unexpected.
Yeah, that's why they had a military contingent there as well. Any other questions or comments on that you might have?
I have another question.
And another question, sure.
How long were they on the land after they could build a house, a covering over their head?
They started right away with the construction of the village. They had been on the Mayflower. Feels good to stand up, by the way. I'm sure you're feeling, getting ready yourselves. They started right away. When they hit Patuxent, as Karen said, it was a cleared field. It was easy to build on and so forth. They started building right away. But the planting they didn't realize. And so that's, again, where the natives really helped them along, so that they ended up having a first harvest, or they wouldn't have been that well prepared. Yes?
Karen, how long did it take you to finish that painting?
Yeah, thank you. I
And
didn't.
when you were working on it, excuse me, did you just concentrate on that one canvas?
Yeah, so it was the drawing, really, that had the concentrated effort, and then transferring that to the canvas. It had a restricted amount of time. It was 6 months, maybe 9 in total, but 6 months really of heavy concentration and the executing of it. So it had to be done in time for their anniversary, the NACCC's anniversary. And so what was 6 months, you know, to you may not seem like, it could have been a lifelong thesis. But when it's your every breath that you're taking, it's even more than that.
Yes.
Were there any Jewish people on the Mayflower?
Were there any Jewish people on the Mayflower? I can't think of a name.
I know there were a lot of early people coming to like Charleston and that area, but I'm wondering about the Mayflower.
Don't recognize any of the names as typically so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then shortly thereafter, 1630 was when, of course, the explosion started, you know, and there's people coming in from everywhere. And that seemed to be what drove King Philip met a comet over the edge. And it's very interesting to note that during King Philip's War, there was not a single Cape Cod town that was attacked. You know, it was all inland. It was all getting into more with the Mashpee colony and subsequent waves of Englishmen and Frenchmen and so forth were coming in and across. Was there one more question, and then we'll... I think we're there. Hey, you've been very kind. We really, really appreciate your...
Question.
But-
On your Cape Cod bicentennial painting, you chose a landmark for each town. I was curious what you chose for Chatham.
I think we had the Chatham Light in the Cape Cod. Yeah, I think we had the Chatham Light.
I think it was Chatham Light. Yeah,
I think so.
we have to go back. We'll look it up for you right afterwards.
And the railroad, I think there was the railroad museum there.
I'm sorry.
The railroad museum, there's a little,
Oh, the railroad.
yeah.
There was a large house on the left. What town was that?
I'd have to look
Yeah,
at the
we'll
image right now.
take a look at it.
Yeah.
Hey, terrific. Hey, thank you very much, everybody. Really enjoyed it. We'll see you later. Thank you.